Everyone see my screen? Everyone can see it. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for inviting Toxic Free NC to lead a conversation today about this topic. I'm Alexis Lucky. I'm the Executive Director of Toxic Free NC here based in Durham. We are a statewide organization focused on environmental health and justice. I did just want to provide the context at the beginning about our involvement with this particular issue, which has been definitely supportive and peripheral. And so I want to just note, by giving this presentation, I don't want to claim expertise on this issue. There have been a lot of impacted community members that have been working on and organizing and meeting around this issue. These are parents and folks with, who live next to these parks and, these schools. And so they are the experts. And of course, we're a member of the coalition and certainly have access and resources around lead and have been following this issue. But I did just want to say that from the outset. I'm going to walk through just kind of a quick timeline of what's happened to date. And again, I'll add the caveat that this is a general timeline. There's a lot that's been happening around this issue for years, and then especially in the past year or two. And so this may be incomplete. And I welcome if there are folks in the room who know more about this or can offer what's missing. Please feel free to speak up and add your voice here. That's so important. And so I'll walk through this timeline, and then Phoebe, I'll pass it over to Phoebe, who will kind of lead a conversation about ways that the folks in this space can, engage and support the folks who are impacted and who are organizing around the issues. And we did invite some folks to join the call who have been organizing, and so I'm not sure if they're in the room or not. Maybe they're joining, maybe they already are in the room, but if they are here, thank you for coming, and please know that your voice is very important and welcome to speak your needs and offer any more information that may not have made it into this very short presentation and timeline. And so with that, I'm going to start out just quickly talking about why we're talking about lead in Durham city parks, and that is the health impacts of lead. It's a neurotoxin. Chronic exposure can have lasting cognitive effects, especially for children. And children are vulnerable. They're at risk to environmental exposures for a number of reasons. A lot of them are physical hand-to-mouth behaviors. They're on the ground, they're crawling, they might be more likely to come into contact with lead in our homes, lead in the soil. And because of their stages of development, they're more likely to experience some of those long-term effects. But lead can also have an impact on adult health. And so that can impact your kidney health, brain, heart, and reproductive health. And so, as they say in public health, there is no safe level of lead. And that's why this is a really, really important conversation. And it's also a very important conversation because it's an environmental justice issue that is disproportionately impacting communities of color and low-income communities, which are going to have higher incidences of lead. We also, at the start of our presentation, we have lead plus here. And it's lead plus because in addition to lead potentially in the soil, there are a number of other contaminants that may be a part of this issue. And so with that, I'm going to start walking through this timeline. So what we know is that in the early 1900s to 1940s, waste from Durham homes and businesses and street collection was burned locally, and it was burned in city-owned incinerators that were sited in historically Black neighborhoods and formerly red-lined neighborhoods around Durham. And those incinerated materials, they contained lead, and they contained presumably other toxic contaminants like arsenic and mercury that are in a number of household materials and things that would have been burned at that time. In the 1950s, those incinerator sites were closed and they were converted into public parks today that we know as Walltown, East End, East Durham, and Lyon parks. Additionally, some of the soil from those incineration parks was used to create Northgate Park as well. And so all of the neighborhoods listed here are predominantly non-white, low income, or both. And, I borrowed this image from NC Newsline coverage, but it shows you the location of those parks that are either in or adjacent to redlined neighborhoods. And so this is really a story of environmental racism, a story of environmental injustice right here, right in Durham, right in our community. So fast forward to fall of 2021, and I'm fast forwarding quite a bit, so there may be some stuff I'm skipping here, but to fall of 2021, a Duke student, with the permission and knowledge of Durham Parks and Rec, sampled soil at 3 of those Durham parks, Walltown, East End, and East Durham, sampling them with the knowledge that there was likely to be lead contamination because these were former incineration sites. That Duke researchers study was published online in last December of 2022, and found significant levels of lead at all three parks that were sampled. They didn't end up having time to do Lyon Park. They notified a Durham Parks employee, but neither Duke nor Durham Parks communicated the results of the study or the health risks to the community in a way that the community feels was adequate. If I'm speaking there on behalf of the community, I want to step away from doing that and just communicate as we understand it. In late May of this past year, a Walltown resident found the Duke study online and contacted the researchers who presented their findings to the Walltown Community Association on May 2022. That was when the city of Durham learned about the findings of the study, and the impacted community residents of Walltown organized and sent a letter to the city of Durham and to Duke, asking for those areas to be restricted, asking for the areas where soil was sampled and found to have high levels of lead, asking those areas to be restricted, asking for community meetings to be held to inform residents about the findings of the study and health risks, asking for additional testing at parks and in surrounding neighborhoods, lead blood testing for residents, engagement between Durham Parks and Rec, Duke, the health department, and other agencies to present an action plan within 90 days. And then transparent documentation of remediation and monitoring efforts in the next 90 days. They also asked for a public apology. Later that month, Dr. Dan Richter, who is the PI of the study, provided a virtual presentation of the findings that was open to the Durham-wide community. He did not offer a public apology. Later that month, the city of Durham hosted a public virtual and in-person meeting and unveiled a plan of action to conduct testing. And then in this past July, just want to say through this whole time period, community members have been meeting and organizing and continuing to ask the city of Durham for action on these issues. And their asks continue to change in response to what's coming out from the city. So the city of Durham contracted with a testing group, which began sampling at all 5 of those parks. And just in August, the city's tests were reported to the community, confirming what the Duke research had found, which was lead levels above the EPA threshold in samples from all 5 parks. In response, some of the park areas are closed and some signage about the lead issue has been provided. And here I'm going to move to a slide that shows just the top line reported findings from these studies. It goes park by park. In Walltown, 8 samples measured greater than the EPA threshold. In East Durham Park, which is 8 samples in the park area measuring greater than the EPA threshold. Northgate in the playground measuring just 1, measuring higher than the EPA threshold. In Lyon area, 1 sample, and in East End Park, 1 sample measured greater than the East End, than the EPA threshold. And then the city also shares here their action that they took as a result. So the Northgate Park playground was closed after August 18th. And here's the second part of the city's soil report, 7 out of 9 playground areas in the 5 tested parks have fabric liners that provided a barrier to the bare soil, and they have not yet tested under the playgrounds. Which brings us to today in September. Actually, I think August 31st was when the Durham Health Department began offering free walk-in blood testing for lead for kids 6 months to 6 years and for pregnant people. So that is ongoing right now. And it's important to tell folks that this is available and get the word out so that people can get in there, get their kids tested, or get tested themselves. And finally, just to say this is not over. This is an ongoing timeline, and that impacted community residents near all of the 5 parks are continuing to organize. They're advocating for transparency from the city, improved signage and public engagement, bilingual resources so that all affected communities can know what's available in terms of testing and about the health risks impacting the community. They're seeking widely available testing, and most importantly, meaningful involvement in all of the steps that the city is taking. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Phoebe to just kind of open up the conversation for some dialogue around these issues. I'm going to stop sharing my screen in a second just so we can, speak face to face, but I did want to say I'll share the slides later, which include some resources so you can read more, because I've really just done a baseline of what's been happening to date, but you can have access to the study itself and the blood testing info, etc. And with that, I will stop sharing and turn it over to Phoebe, if I can figure out how to stop sharing.
Thanks, Alexis. While you do that, I'll start just talking about why is this an environmental justice issue? Just reading the EPA's definition of environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And so I just want to really call into attention here the phrase meaningful involvement, which is something that communities really pushed for in that definition. That meaningful involvement, it goes beyond beyond just engagement. So where decision makers may be meeting behind closed doors and then they come back and inform the community of their decisions, meaningful involvement is really that the community members are working alongside decision makers and, folks who are really holding power in this situation, right? The power to put the resources where they need to be, etc. So really working together throughout the process towards a shared goal. And just, really want to also talk about this as an environmental justice issue. As we saw in the timeline, the history of redlining, where incinerators were placed, how neighborhoods were developed. And this all goes back to that EJ definition, respect to development. And we can see a pattern of environmental racism. And that's the intentional siting of polluting and waste facilities in communities primarily populated by African Americans, Latinos, Indigenous peoples. And that actually, we can include some of those resources too, but environmental racism was a term coined by Dr. Ben Chavis and some of those, like the understanding of Warren County and what was happening with the PCB contamination helped influence that. So, so I think, okay, great. I see Alexis put these in the chat. So just talking about, this is an environmental health issue. Environmental pollutants can lead to an increase in health issues from just maybe a rash, skin issue, maybe could be considered minor skin issues, to asthma to respiratory problems, even to cancer. The environmental pollutants are linked to all of these health issues, right? So the WHO, they talk about and they identify environmental measures as prerequisites for good health. And one of those is including safe use of chemicals. And so we know that, as Alexis said, there's no safe level of lead, right? So, being an environmental health issue, that communities are dealing with these pollutants in the soil, then into their bodies, into their blood, their children, etc. And lead is a neurotoxin, can lead to lifelong cognitive effects. So, we are, I know this is Durham Environmental Coalition. So one thing I want to just, really highlight is healthy environments equals healthy people. And that, so the work that is, being done around protecting the environment is also, we need to protect people. So we cannot separate people from planet. We cannot separate protecting our environments from protecting the people that are exposed to whatever's in that environment. And I'm going kind of fast because I'm looking at the time. And I think too, if folks want to chime in, you want to raise your hand, or if you want to put questions into the chat, I think that would be a way for, people to be able to add to this. And to just say that there are ongoing community meetings happening. There's ongoing community organizing happening, and ways that you all could get involved. You can come to the meetings. I met with the Walltown Community Association last week, and they're planning to host a meeting in Walltown in the next couple of weeks. And I know some folks have been to these meetings too that are on this call. Some of the things that have come out of past meetings is like establishing some committees and teams around community engagement, community involvement, advocacy, and more research too, because there's also, the challenge of trusting officials, that if we're not working alongside them and knowing exactly what's happening, then we can have a breakdown in trust. And so there's ways to get involved by joining those meetings, as individuals and as concerned citizens, as concerned residents, I should say, but also as organizations. There's definitely a need for some funding if organizations have any way that they can support these community meetings and the ongoing organizing efforts. Things that are needed are like paying for the space to meet, if we need to pay for the space. Like Walltown Community Association was saying that, to host a meeting at the rec center, they will have to pay for that use of the space. Paying for the use of space for bringing food, like if we just, have some coffee and pastries so people can gather not on an empty stomach, or if we're having an evening meeting, being able to help with dinner and helping people get there, childcare, so that everybody, can, all parents can come and be involved, maybe transportation, etc. So I kind of ran through that fast to just give us 5 minutes for anything else that folks wanted to add or chime in.
I'm gonna jump in. Phoebe, were you gonna say something more? Or?
Go ahead, and then Sherry can go.
I just wanted to say thank you for all of this. I also, to your point, I really appreciate the solutions you offered about helping support the communities. I'm wondering if this is a symptom of a larger issue that we're seeing in government right now that seems to disproportionately affect for communities of color in our poor communities, and how we can raise this. It's just one of, like, the sanitation workers is another great example of one of many issues. So how do we, as like an environmental coalition, start to weave this into that larger story and push each in our own way for justice?
I appreciate that, because I don't think, it's all connected, right? And there's no kind of single issue. And also, I think it's important we don't silo too, right? Or we don't tunnel vision into just like, oh, well, let's deal with this over here, knowing that capacity is always a thing and we always have to, when there's so much going on. But the more that we can, and I think you even said it in your principles, right, of like being intersectional and really understanding that is important, and taking action for it. And Sherry, if you wanted to add something. Oh, I think you're on mute, sorry.
That's very important. Thank you. I was saying that I'm going to start on the more factual and then speak to this larger issue, and I'll try to keep it real brief. Phoebe has heard me say in some of the meetings, because I've been an active participant, as has Benita and Shanetta, in these community meetings. And I'm disturbed that we continue to call it lead in the park. So I really appreciated that lead plus in Phoebe's presentation, because it's coal-fired incinerator plants, it was incinerator ash and coal ash. And I was pressing the city, and to their credit, they finally did incorporate just a little bit of heavy metals testing for the usual suspects for that kind of incineration ash. And they did find that a number of those places that they sampled had many different heavy metals, including high levels above background and above EPA levels of arsenic, cobalt, and manganese, and maybe some others. But a problem was that very few sites were tested for these additional constituents. For example, Walltown had one small, less than a foot that was sampled. And so even with this skimpy testing, it showed that sort of what we would expect, that there's more of a problem. And there were big swaths of, I believe, East Durham Park and maybe East End or Lyon Park that weren't tested at all for lead or anything, because Mid-Atlantic, the contractor, said that it was overgrown and had poison ivy. And, the city didn't clear it out before Mid-Atlantic was going in to do their testing. So we don't have information on what's in those sections of the park. So the city is supposedly waiting now for the state to come back with a suggested remediation plan. And to me, this is not adequate, because we don't have an adequate underlying foundation of knowledge about what's there and where to really base a remediation plan around. Now I'm going to segue into some of the other problems. So
I think you have about 20 seconds, Sherry, because we're getting close here.
Durham has a huge trust deficit, and part of that is a deficiency from the funding of core responsibilities. And so the way the city handled this was really shocking, in not telling the truth about what they knew when, and continuing to do a suppression strategy instead of a remediation and inclusion strategy. And so I think that's really what we need people power to press for, is an inclusion strategy.
And that is, I think, a great way to end, to just say that, it's also that we need to be listening to our impacted community members and be guided by, like what Alexis was saying, they're subject matter experts. We can bring in our technical experience, but make sure that we're all doing that together, and not just, doing the helicopter into a community and tell folks what they need. So that is really key in this, organizing. So please, everyone, join the effort, and let us know, if you have any questions and ways that you can get involved. And I'll pass it to you, Tanya.
Thank you all so much. And I don't need to be anywhere right away, so I'm happy to keep this conversation open if there's still conversations that people are anxious to continue. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to say or ask?
I did see a question in the chat. It was about like testing sites. I'm not sure if it got answered. It was up there a little bit. How many samples we're taking from each of the parks? So I think we can share, I don't know, Alexis, do you have the answer to that?
I shared the link in the chat.
Okay, great. Yeah, so, and then also we do know that there is this, what Sherry was saying, there's, the city is waiting on the state for some next steps. And, I think that there's some things that will be interesting to hear coming out of that. And it's also, we don't have to wait to come together and continue the organizing.
Yes.
Thank you so much. So our next Durham Environmental Coalition meeting will be October 9th at 11 a.m. And we'll be hearing from Samantha Kropp from Sound Rivers. And any other announcements that you might not have gotten a chance to share, please just email them to me and I'll include them in the message to the whole group. Thank you so much to Alexis and Phoebe for your expertise and sharing. Okay.
Thanks for having us.
Bye, everyone.
Good to
Have
see
a
you
great
all.
week.
Take care.